Hello, this is a pre-record of the How to Develop Your Presentation Skills part of the How To series from CareerCentral. My name is Adrienne and I am one of the careers advisors at CareerCentral. So this presentation is going to just briefly look at what makes for a good presentation, how you begin to structure a presentation, thinking about actually delivering it and how to manage nerves and make sure that you're well practiced and confident. And because actually presentations form part of academic work, it's also thinking about, the kind of the crossover between academic and interviews and where else you're going to encounter presentations. So whilst we tend to focus on interviews, it's also really super useful to think about this presentation in terms of how it impacts on your academic presentations. So presentations are increasingly important because employers need to have employees who can précis and structure information. Many jobs will require presentation, even in an informal sense, to colleagues, to clients, to senior managers, to summarise proposals, to pitch for ideas. So presentations are very common in a number of roles. But it's also something that can be integral to the interview process, particularly in assessment centres, which I'll go on to talk about in a moment. So it's worth thinking about actually what is really the purpose behind a presentation for an academic in terms of understanding your learning, but also in this instance, why an employer is asking you to present. So these are just some of the things that a presentation is bringing out in you. Your ability to consider an audience, your ability to plan, to research, to order information and to précis that information, so to bring it down to its most important parts. Thinking about taking knowledge and applying that knowledge or demonstrating a particular interest and enthusiasm for a subject. It's asking you to think critically about the content and how you convey that content to others. And it may be that it's asking you to take larger issues into account when you are writing your presentation. So what does this particular topic cover, but are there other things that we need to take account of? And you can imagine that being particularly useful in a workplace setting. Here's my project, this is what I'm proposing we do. However, we do need to think about that project or this team or the fact that we're going to be moving buildings in 3 months' time. So taking those bigger things into account. Particularly where you're being asked to do a presentation in an assessment centre, so it's not a pre-prepared presentation, then it's asking you to work under pressure and to really get those ideas communicated to your audience with very little time to prepare. But that's kind of not a polished presentation necessarily. It's about that content and showing that you can do something with that content to clearly convey that message. And any presentation needs to be engaging in some way or another. We've all experienced poor presentation skills in the audiences that we've been part of. And there's nothing worse than a very tedious, lengthy presentation. I hope you're not thinking this now about mine. That, you're thinking, please just let this be over. Okay, so you need to be able to engage your audience. And also, the reason I've put follow instructions here is because actually instructions are super important with presentations. If you're asked to give a presentation that takes 5 minutes, it means that you need to write a presentation that takes 5 minutes, not 6, not 10, not 2, but 5. And that's super important in interviews because you're not only going to be marked, so to speak, on your presentation content and how you've structured and presented it, but actually did you follow the instructions that were asked of you in the first instance? So lots of P's in presentation, preparation being the first. Think about why you've been asked to give this presentation. If it's a topic, what are you being asked to demonstrate here? Do they want you to think critically about something? Do they want you to show your research skills? Is it about being persuasive? Is it about generating discussion? Is it about pitching an alternative perspective? Is it having an opinion? Is it about formulating an argument? And it's always worth bearing in mind that for some interviews you might be asked to present to an imagined audience. So why are they doing that? Who's the audience that they have in mind? And why? How is that going to affect the way I put this presentation together? So an example might be you've been asked to present to a group of students, or you've been asked to present to a group of employers. How might you change the tone, the content, the focus of the presentation depending on those two different audiences? So if you've been asked to present to an audience, you've been asked to do that for a reason. So think about the reason and what kind of messaging needs to come through as a result. So think about that audience, but think about some of those practical things as well. How long is it going to be? How long have you got to prepare it? Is it going to have a Q&A? Is it going to be in PowerPoint or on Prezi or another kind of software? Or are you going to be presenting without the backup of software? What's the purpose of the presentation? Is it, if you look at the job description, very much about persuasion because it's a very sales-oriented role? Or is it about explaining? Or is it about adapting information and making it more understandable? So again, thinking, why are they asking me to do this and how does that impact on the way I design the presentation? And just check that you've got all the information that you need before you get going, because it's just giving yourself the confidence to start writing your presentation, knowing that you're knowing what you're talking about. If it is an electronic presentation, is it in person or remotely? If it's remote, so you're perhaps giving it as part of an interview on Teams, then do you understand that tech? Have you downloaded the app so that you've got the full functionality? Have you practiced using the app? Have you actually shared this presentation with somebody else and practiced getting the presentation up on your screen and sharing your screen and getting going? If it's in person, have you got a backup version? If they've said that you can use presentation software, have you emailed it to yourself? Have you got a data stick with it on? Have you been asked to email it in advance? Have you got a backup? And worst case scenario, if something goes wrong with the tech, have you prepared some handouts that you can print off and give to your audience and to help you really manage that sort of shock of not being able to lean on your software by having the slides in front of you in presentation form? So think about how you make yourself feel secure if you're giving a presentation. Okay, so planning your presentation. It is a story. It has a beginning, a middle and an end. And so the first thing to think about is, what is your story? How do I answer the question, or how do I give my argument in a way that's well structured and it contains the evidence? Clearly, if you are going to be writing slides, then this is not going to be what your slides look like. But it could be an indication of what it is you want to talk about. So some people will begin by writing a full-length version of how they want their presentation to read. But this can't be a slide, obviously. This is for you to think about the content of your presentation. But what you're aiming to do clearly is to reduce this down to bullet points, to be able to pick up the salient points in your presentation and to talk to these, to use your bullet points as your support. So you're not just reading from your bullet points, but your bullet points are there to actually help you navigate your story. So you may talk about the University of East Anglia, but you may not be reading bullet point from bullet point. So I want to talk to you today about the University of East Anglia, which was established in 1963. As you know, we're in Norwich, and this is a campus that was built by Dennis Lausden, who was also responsible for building the South Bank Centre in London. Another iconic set of buildings at the UEA are the ziggurats. These buildings were completed by 1967. So as you can hear, I'm adding my own narrative onto these bullet points. This comes with practice. It comes over time. So don't feel that, you know, this is totally impossible. It's not. You get better, but give yourself the structure that helps you. You can also obviously use images. And that would allow you to cut your bullet points down even further, and those bullet points then become your prompt. But also remember that when somebody sees these slides afterwards, they'll be able to think, oh yeah, Dennis Lasden. No, she talked about the fact that Dennis Lasden built the South Bank Centre. I remember that now. So it's a way of kind of giving the viewer the prompts that they need when they come back to the presentation at a later point, which often happens. You could, if you feel super confident, go to just having images. And so having slides that look, you know, very beautiful. And you're saying, okay, so as you probably know, this is a ziggurat. It's one of 6 ziggurats at UEA. These were designed by Dennis Lasden and completed in 1967 as part of the main build of the UEA campus. As you know, Dennis Lasden was responsible for designing the South Bank Centre in London. So if you're super confident, fine, brilliant, use images. But think about, you know, finding the space that's most comfortable for you and is also the right way for this particular presentation. You may well need images, but you may well need bullet points as well, so that your viewers are able to listen to what you're saying, but they're also following what's going on the screen. On the subject of images, think about the images that you're using. They can brighten up a page, they can attract attention, but don't make them too obscure. Think about why you're connecting an image in your own mind to a piece of text. Because if you have a really odd image, then it may be that your viewers are too busy looking at the image and thinking, why has she put that there? So make sure there's a logic behind the images that you choose. And obviously be audience aware and respect copyright. So think about any images that might upset people, that are perhaps not appropriate for a particular audience, or just not appropriate full stop. A top tip, if you use Microsoft Online, you can use their online image insert, and that will find you images that are Creative Commons, so you have permission to use them. If you don't use Microsoft products, then you can use the Creative Commons website and you can search for images on that site, and again they will have permission for you to use them. Credit your photographs. My credits are actually hidden under here, so a reader will pick them up, but for the sake of this particular presentation I'm just crediting as Creative Commons. But if you're doing a professional presentation to an employer, then it's really worth putting your photo credits in, because it shows that you respect copyright. Okay, building it. The beginning. Say hello, say who you are, what your presentation is going to be about. So give yourself a slide that allows you to kind of step into the presentation. You may want to start with questions, something to focus your mind and their mind and to kind of really get people thinking. It really depends on the nature of the presentation, but give yourself a strong start. Your middle slides are there to outline your argument and develop your story. And so you may be thinking about 1 slide per argument, and that would give you maybe 3 or 4 bullet points to develop that particular part of your presentation. 5 minutes, 5 slides with a beginning and an end slide on it. So, you know, you're looking at no more than 7 slides for a 5-minute presentation until, you know, you've got the hang of presenting it and you think, actually, I've got time in my presentation to add a little bit more detail here. I could put another slide in. But try and stay low in your slide numbers as you at the outset, because that will help you to then edit and tailor as you're developing your presentation. The clearer the headings, the more structure you give to your story and the less work you have to do. You don't have to read your heading. The heading is there, and it may be that it's a shorthand to go straight into the body of the slide. And think about how you prioritise your bullet points. Think about how that fits with the narrative, and what's the most important message you want to get across, because that needs to be either your opening or your closing bullet point. And do use images, use graphics, but try not to overlay the page with too much content and make it difficult to read. And then you need to simply summarise where you've got to with your presentation. End with a question if you want to, end with an invitation to take questions, but certainly try and end on a positive note. Give yourself a little kind of wrap-up sentence that means that your presentation doesn't just peter out, but you're ending with, "Thank you for listening to my presentation. My name was Adrienne Jolly. I'm happy to take any questions." End of presentation, okay? So practice the ending. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them that you've told them. That is the presentation, okay? Couple of things about layout that really go without saying. Just avoid too much text. Don't cram your slides. Try not to use crazy colour schemes, and if possible use a slightly off-white background. That helps people who may have dyslexia. It helps people with colour blindness if you're not using multiple colours. And just go easy on the animation, the clever stuff. It's about your message, and if your slide design starts to actually interfere with your message, then you're doing yourself no favours. Keep an eye out for typos. I already know actually that there is a typo coming out in this slide, and I have a real problem editing slides. For some reason I really struggle to see typos on slides, so be aware of that. So I'm going to tell you that the typo later on in this presentation is intentional, when if I was being perfectly honest, it's not. And do cite your sources. You can put them at the end of your presentation, or you can put them at the end of each page, but you cite your sources as you would in any other context. And then practice. Practice to yourself, practice recording yourself, practice online if it needs to be an online presentation, but also practice in front of people. And when you do practice, don't just say, "How was it?" and accept "Oh, it was really great." Actually ask them very specific questions. Was the opening okay? Did you get a sense of what my key points were? Did it feel logical? Was it backed up? Did I close on the presentation properly? Was there anything distracting about the way that I presented? Could you hear me okay? And what do you think my presentation was about? So actually check their learning from your presentation, because if they think it's great and they really enjoyed it and the pictures were brilliant, but they can't tell you what the presentation was about, then maybe something needs to be tweaked. And then it comes time to present. So think about your body language, smiling, making eye contact, moving if you dare. Breathing, super important to breathe, and give yourself space to actually gesture in the way that you would normally gesture. So thinking about what makes you comfortable, and that includes appropriate clothing, feeling that you can move and feel comfortable in the clothes that you're wearing, particularly important with interview suits and the kind of shoes that you choose to wear for interview. If you're standing to present, then an open, stable stance, so legs just slightly apart, so that your shoulders are nice and relaxed, and you've kind of your diaphragm is open and you're able to breathe. If you've planned and you've done your preparation and you've really kind of thought about this presentation, then knowing what to expect is going to help you just in your confidence and help you overcome those nerves. And some people do use visualization, so they concentrate on how they're going to feel coming out of the presentation rather than what they feel coming into it. So I'm going to come out of this presentation actually feeling really pleased that I've done the absolute best that I could. And it is super, super, super important to remember that nobody is asking you to present because they want to trip you up. They need you to present, they're interested in you, they do not want you to fail, and they will encourage you. It will be a supportive environment as much as you feel any interview is supportive. It can't always feel like that, but nobody's setting out to trip you up. And after any presentation, try to get feedback. What worked well? What might you do differently the next time? And even if you get the job as a result of that presentation and the interview that followed, fantastic, brilliant, but you'll still be having to give presentations in the future. So it's so important to learn from every opportunity, because this is a skill that develops over time. If your presentation is part of a job, expect it to be something that comes up at interview. If it's something that is really visible in the job description, they talk about it a couple of times in the job description and it comes up in the person specification, then don't feel surprised if when you're invited to interview, you're asked to prepare a presentation. And it doesn't just apply to graduate schemes and assessment centres. If you are applying for a job at UEA where presentation skills are key to the role, we will ask you to give a short presentation. At interview, it could take one of two forms. You may get a request to prepare a presentation in advance. You may be given a topic. You are probably going to be allowed to use software for that particular presentation. It's likely to be related to the role. It could be pre-recorded. It's not too common, but it's possible. But it's going to have some very distinct purpose for them as interviewers. They're either going to be testing your knowledge or your ability to adapt to an audience, or your ability to persuade. But something, going back to that first list of why we get you to do this, there'll be a reason in there, and you'll find that reason in the job description. If it's in an assessment centre, you might be asked to present on the spot, which can feel a bit daunting. But actually, really what that is testing is your ability to work under pressure, pull information together, and then present it back to people under a very limited time frame. It could be part of a group exercise. So you may be given a task as a group, perhaps assessing a particular proposal, and being asked to think about what your recommendations would be, and then at the end of that group exercise to present back to your assessors on your findings. If it is a group presentation, then every member of the group needs to present some of it, okay? You can't step out of that part of the process, you need to participate. The other way you might encounter it is if you're asked to review a case study and present your findings, and that's more likely to be informal, but you're still presenting ideas, so you're still thinking about the beginning, the middle, the end, pulling out those key points. What are the salient points that we need our business to understand about this particular piece of work? So you're presenting perhaps to one or two people, no more, but you're still thinking about the basic principles of a good presentation. So with on-the-spot presentations, structure your time. How long have you got? Be clear about what you're setting out to do. Just double check that you really understand the brief that you've been set. Is there any other resource that is being offered to you that you need to really understand before you can start writing your presentation or summarise your discussion? You're still precising the story, you're still using bullet points as a way of cueing for you. And if it's about teamwork, the whole exercise is being observed to understand how you collaborate and how you share ideas. It's not about a super polished presentation. It's testing a different set of skills to a pre-written formal presentation. but you're still following those same rules to get you to this point. So a good presentation, it meets the brief, it does what it's supposed to do, it has a structure that helps both you and your audience follow your story. There's clarity in the message, you know what you want your audience to take away, and your presentation is leading up to that point. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's accessible. It's targeting your audience, whether that's a real audience or an imagined audience. You know who you're speaking to and the level, so to speak, that you're really pitching your presentation at. And it sticks to time. So that's a quick, almost whistle-stop overview of planning and preparing for presentations. So you might want to think about your next steps. Do you need to follow up on anything in particular? And I've put some links here to the resources on Career Hub and on LinkedIn Learning, and you'll obviously be able to access these slides having viewed this presentation. Are there other sessions that you might need to attend in the how-to program? I've mentioned assessment centres, for example. Is that something that you need to understand in greater detail? And if that's the case, then do have a look at the rest of the how-to workshop program. And you will see at the end of this presentation, I'm just going to skip through here, there's links on this slide for ways in which we can help. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. Any questions, please come and ask us, come and find help. We are available through Career Hub and at the library. Come in and see us in our new home. And good luck with your presentations. Thanks for listening.